August 6th and August 9th, 1945. These two dates, they carry vastly different meanings depending on where you're from. For much of the world, they marked the beginning of the long-awaited end of World War II, a conflict that had gripped the entire world in fear for nearly 6 years. For them, the feeling that followed August 6th and August 9th, 1945 was one of relief. But for the people of Japan, these two dates are tied to far grimmer words, like defeat, and most of all, loss. Because on these two fateful days, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs, called Little Boy and Fat Man, on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki respectively, and in mere seconds following their detonation, both of these historic cities were completely obliterated, reduced to rubble. But the most tragic consequence was of course the staggering loss of hundreds of thousands of lives in both cities combined, the vast majority of which were innocent civilians. Even now, close to 80 years later, it's still difficult to truly grasp the sheer scale of destruction and suffering that unfolded in those moments. And yet, against all odds, there were some who, despite being unlucky enough to be present when the nukes were dropped, survived the atomic bombings. Those who lived to tell the tale. These individuals, known in Japan as hibakusha, were rare. Only about 1 in 25 according to estimates. But included among them was an even rarer group of survivors. An estimated 160 people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time not once, but twice, witnessing firsthand the only 2 nuclear attacks in human history. But then, among those 160 AA bomb witnesses, you can find someone unique, a person who is literally one of a kind. The one and only man ever officially recognized as having survived both atomic blasts. Depending on how you look at it, this guy was either the luckiest or the unluckiest person to ever live. I mean, think about it. What are the odds of being present for both of history's only wartime nuclear bombings, and then somehow walking away from both? Well, my friends, that is exactly the story that we're diving into today. The unbelievable tale of Yamaguchi Tsutomu, the man who survived 2 atomic bombs. So, the first question that naturally comes to mind is, how did Yamaguchi Tsutomu end up in Hiroshima on August 6th to witness the first atomic bomb, and then again in Nagasaki on the 9th for the second? The latter part of that question is actually pretty easy to answer. Nagasaki was Yamaguchi's hometown. But what was it that linked him to Hiroshima, of all places? Well, that answer comes in the shape of 3 very familiar diamonds. Mitsubishi. Today, Mitsubishi is primarily associated with cars, especially in the West. So you might be wondering, what does a Japanese car company have to do with this story? Well, just to avoid going too far off track with a full history lesson about Mitsubishi, here's the short version. While Mitsubishi did start making cars in the early 1900s, the company as a whole was, and still is, much bigger than just automobiles. Originally founded as a shipping firm in 1870, Mitsubishi had grown into a massive conglomerate by the time World War II began. But more importantly, the company played a critical role in Japan's war effort, most notably as the Imperial Japanese Army's top supplier of aircraft and naval ships. In fact, the very planes that attacked Pearl Harbor, built by Mitsubishi. But for our story, what really matters is the company's shipbuilding division. It was in May of 1945 that 29-year-old Yamaguchi Tsutomu, an engineer working as a commercial ship designer at Mitsubishi's Nagasaki shipyard, received an assignment from his superior. He, along with 2 of his co-workers, was to be sent on a 3-month-long design project at Mitsubishi's Hiroshima shipyard. I guess you can see where this is going. Yamaguchi packed his bags and boarded a train, leaving behind his wife and his son in Nagasaki. As he traveled, he witnessed firsthand the devastation left by air raids across Japan. Burned fields, crumbling buildings, ruined warehouses. It was a stark reminder of just how desperate Japan's military situation had become by the summer of '45. Hiroshima, on the other hand, was completely different. The city was still largely intact. Lush greenery, flowing rivers, and a sense of normalcy that made it feel almost untouched by the war. And for the first few weeks, life at the newly constructed Hiroshima shipyard was peaceful. But as the summer wore on, that peace would slowly begin to crumble. By June, enemy forces had gained greater control over the airspace surrounding Hiroshima. The sound of air raid sirens became more and more familiar to Yamaguchi. Food supplies became increasingly scarce, and by July, evacuations had begun. But despite all that, Yamaguchi and his 2 colleagues had to remain focused on their project. So they pressed on, determined to complete their work soon. And by early August, they had succeeded, right on schedule. Now, they were eager to return home. Not only did they miss their families, but news had reached them that parts of the shipyard back home had been destroyed just days earlier. Frustratingly though, they actually weren't allowed to leave just yet, as their return wasn't scheduled to take place for a couple more days, until August 7th. It was only a couple of days longer, they thought, and so, with no other option left anyway, they decided to just wait patiently. And then, the morning of August 6th had arrived. Spirits were high. It was a bright and sunny Monday morning, and the following day, they would finally be on their way back to Nagasaki. After sharing a cup of tea with one of his superiors, Yamaguchi boarded a tram, heading to what was supposed to be his final day of work in Hiroshima. As he gazed out the window, he wondered if he would ever return to this beautiful city, the ever-present threat of war lingering in the back of his mind. Then, at around 8 AM, his tram arrived at Eba Station in Enamicho, a few kilometers outside the city center. He had to walk the rest of the way, so he got off the tram, and just before 8:15 AM, while walking past a sweet potato patch, he noticed the distant roar of an aircraft. His instincts as an engineer told him it must be a bomber, but when he looked up into the cloudless sky, he couldn't see it. But he could certainly still hear it. The low hum of the plane turned into the sound of a sharp descent, and then he spotted something. 2 small parachutes drifting slowly toward the ground. Immediately, a feeling of unease washed over him, and just as he sensed danger, Yamaguchi regained consciousness a few moments later. The force of the blast had hurled him into the sweet potato field. Dazed and struggling to comprehend what had just happened, there was only one thing that he was certain of. He was still alive. As he looked up at the sky, which had been crystal clear only minutes ago, he watched it turn darker and darker, blotted out by a massive, towering pillar of fire. Where the lively city of Hiroshima once stood, there was now only devastation. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima, named Little Boy, had a radius of total destruction of approximately 1.6 kilometers, or roughly 1 mile. Everything within that area, buildings, streets, and of course tens of thousands of people were obliterated in an instant. But the devastation didn't necessarily end there, as even those outside that immediate blast zone suffered horrific injuries. Thousands more perished in the days, weeks, months, and even years that followed, their bodies ravaged by burns, radiation, and trauma. As for Yamaguchi Tsutomu, he had been about 3 kilometers, or just under 2 miles, from the hypocenter, far enough from the blast to avoid immediate death, but also close enough to suffer serious wounds. His hair had been burned down to his scalp, the left side of his face and his left arm badly burned by the explosion's intense heat. Yet, in a state of shock, he barely noticed his injuries until other survivors pointed them out to him. As determined to reach his workplace at Hiroshima shipyard, he pushed forward through a scene that seemed apocalyptic, walking beneath an eerie black rain that began falling from the sky, past burning buildings and crumbling structures. At the shipyard, he was able to treat his wounds, rest briefly, and finally reunite with his 2 colleagues from Nagasaki, who were relieved to see their friend alive. After all, they had gone out to look for him and thought him to be dead. By 5 PM, arrangements had been made for the surviving shipyard workers to evacuate by sea, traveling towards Ujina Harbor, near their dormitory on the outskirts of the city. There, Yamaguchi and his friends were informed that they would have to return to Nagasaki the following day. This would be their last opportunity to go home for at least a month. And so, just as originally intended, Yamaguchi and his colleagues prepared to leave Hiroshima on August the 7th. Just with a vastly different mood than they had expected. As they left the dormitory the following morning, their destination was Koi Station, where the rescue train was scheduled to depart at 1 PM. With no other option, they had to walk there together, along the way witnessing the most haunting scenes of destruction that they had ever seen. Entire towns reduced to nothing, streets, rivers, and bridges lined with charred, barely recognizable corpses and shivering burn victims barely clinging to life. Yamaguchi later recalled, quote, "The sight left a deep impression on us. However, after that, we became ruthlessly apathetic towards such a horrible sight around us, so that we hardly got shocked by whatever we saw." After hours upon hours of walking through the relentless heat of the summer sun, Yamaguchi and one of his 2 colleagues finally made it to the station on time and boarded the train back home, with no time to search for their buddy, who had been separated from them earlier. But for now, for the first time since he saw that white flash appear above the city of Hiroshima, Yamaguchi felt a momentary sense of relief, and as exhaustion overcame his tired mind and body, he fell into a deep sleep on a train that would finally take him back home. The rescue train arrived in Nagasaki in the late morning of August 8th. Though relieved to be home, Yamaguchi was in very poor condition. His left arm was severely swollen, and he had developed a high fever during the journey. After an exhausting visit to the Mitsubishi hospital for treatment, he reunited with his parents before finally returning home with his wife and his son. His family, they had already come to terms with the idea that he most likely perished in Hiroshima. And yet, here he was, sick, injured, but also alive, and happy to be reunited with his loved ones. Soon, his neighbors paid him a visit too. After all, they wanted to hear his story, what had actually happened in Hiroshima. This was the first time that Yamaguchi described to someone in great detail what he had witnessed, warning them about the horrifying effects of this horrible new bomb. He also gave his neighbors advice on how to react if a similar event were to occur again. But what he didn't realize was that, in just a few hours, that advice would prove terrifyingly useful. It was the morning of August 9th that Yamaguchi, still suffering from a high fever and exhaustion, rolled out of bed and forced himself to report to work earlier than usual. Arriving at work completely wrapped in bandages, he once again drew everyone's attention as the guy who had survived Hiroshima. He advised his co-workers to open all the windows. This would allow a potential blast wave to pass through the building, then made his way to his section manager, Mr. Nomura, to report on the status of his 2 colleagues. But soon, their conversation had shifted to what happened in Hiroshima. Nomura said he simply couldn't believe that a single bomb had been capable of destroying an entire city. And then, just as he had finished his sentence, at 11:02 a.m. local time, the second atomic bomb named Fat Man detonated approximately 500 meters or 1,600 feet above Nagasaki, its explosion instantly killing between 40,000 and 75,000 people. Nearly half the city was obliterated in a flash. Eerily similar to what had happened in Hiroshima 3 days prior, Yamaguchi found himself a bit more than 3 kilometers, or just under 2 miles, from the hypocenter of the detonation. As soon as he saw that familiar white flash, he instinctively dove beneath a desk for cover as the blast ripped through the office building, shattering windows and blowing about all kinds of debris. Once it had passed, he ran towards an air defense tower which was located behind the office building. From there, he saw something he had hoped never to witness again. In the sky towards Urakami, the mushroom cloud, just like I saw in Hiroshima, rose audaciously. It looked as if it were scoffing me, someone who had barely escaped from Hiroshima with his life. It was a satanic pillar of fire. It was a prophecy of Japan's future. Less than a week after the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, which was then formally signed on September 2nd, 1945. With that, World War II had officially come to an end, and what followed was a new chapter in Japanese history: the American occupation and a nationwide shift from destruction to reconstruction. Hiroshima, despite the devastation it had endured, managed to return to its pre-war population levels by 1958, just 13 years after the bombing. The city was not only rebuilt, it emerged stronger than ever before, not only as a thriving economic center, but also as a living testament to the horrors of war, preserving countless reminders of the events of 1945. Nagasaki, Yamaguchi Tsutomu's hometown, also rose from its ashes, with reconstruction efforts largely completed by 1955. However, the end of the war also brought an immediate impact on Yamaguchi's personal life. Mitsubishi, which had lost its primary pre-war and wartime client, the Japanese military, was forced to lay off around 20,000 employees, including Yamaguchi Tsutomu. He soon found work as a clerk and translator for the American occupation forces, before spending a full decade teaching English at various schools across Japan. But in 1956, he was finally able to return to his old workplace at the Nagasaki shipyard, where he would remain until his retirement. As for the scars and the burns left on his body by the bombings, they gradually healed, though it was a slow and painful process. His daughter recalled that until she was around 12 years old, her father's body was pretty much constantly wrapped in bandages. But even as his wounds had healed, the long-term effects of radiation exposure lingered, much like the emotional scars and the haunting memories of August 6th and August 9th. Initially, Yamaguchi sought to just leave the past behind. He was grateful to be alive, and considering what he had endured, in relatively good health. When the Japanese government began officially recognizing atomic bomb survivors, or hibakusha, he applied for survivor status, but only as a victim of the Nagasaki bombing, not Hiroshima. It wasn't until January of 2009, at the age of 92, that he applied for and was granted official recognition as a double A-bomb survivor, making him the only person in history to ever receive this designation from the Japanese government. So, was he truly the only one to experience both A-bombs? In reality, no. After all, at least one of his 2 Nagasaki colleagues had also been present during both bombings, and it is estimated that around 200 Hiroshima residents fled to Nagasaki in the aftermath of August 6. Now, despite his initial reluctance to dwell on the past, Yamaguchi Tsutomu eventually embraced his role as a voice for the hibakusha. In his 80s, he wrote a book about his experiences, shared his story with audiences around the world, and became a dedicated advocate for nuclear disarmament, something he continued to fight for until his passing in January of 2010 at the age of 93. Got anything to add to this one? Then head for the comments down below to share your thoughts and opinions with us. And as usual, I have a couple of thank yous that I need to send out to all my amazing Patreon supporters, including Bobby Wu, Ronan, The Hockey Gentleman, Javier Soravia, Capybara Chuck, Turam, Daniel Dees, RK0, Sierran DC, White Gilden, Justin Down, Yokota Space Whale, Steve Matsui, Cats and Soup, Chart B-Man, Ben Herodine, Metal Mama, T-Bird, and Tom Ericus Prime. And hey, if you're still here, then thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.